I'm interviewing you for my class AP Human Geography about your parents' migration to the United States.
My father was John van der Laar. He would have been called Jan in Holland. And my mother, Hendrika or Drika Rijkers, they got married and then came over here right after they were married. In 1952, they were married at the end of May 1950. 27, my father was 27, my mother was 25. They came on a boat. It was a merchant vessel, the Leerdam. They docked in New York City Harbor and then took a train into Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin, where I was their first child, born a year after they came here, and I lived there in Wisconsin until I was 8 weeks old. And then they moved to Ohio.
Did your parents feel they had a choice in moving to America?
They were having trouble. They wanted a farm. They were having trouble finding one. And jobs were not too plentiful after World War II. Holland was still recovering from the war. So they felt like they would have a better future if they came here. My father had a good education, but there were too many graduates for the jobs that he had trained for, conservation and forestry. And so my father had a bit of adventure in him, and he thought it would be nice to immigrate.
So they moved mostly due to economic reasons?
They were economic reasons, that's right.
Was going to Wisconsin the original plan, or when your family decided to leave Holland, or was there a different plan?
That was the original plan, because they needed to be sponsored, and that was where their sponsor lived, so it was just natural to go there.
How did relatives already in America influence your parents' decision to move to the United States?
Yes. Because my mother's aunt had done well here, she thought that they would too, and she suggested coming to where they lived. She bought lots of rentals, and the family prospered from that. So she thought it was a great model for doing well in her new country, and she suggested it to my father.
Did your parents emigrate from Holland directly to the farm you grew up, or were there stops along the way?
They lived in several places. So my father managed a farm in Hinckley, Ohio. It was owned by a wealthy widow in the Cleveland area. It was their summer place. And he milked cows there and kept the farm going. And then when she sold it to the Park District, he needed to find another place. So we moved to Rising Sun, where he also managed a farm. And then he and my mother saved up their money, and they bought their own farm in Helena, Ohio. And that's where I lived from the age of 12 on. And my father and mother lived there until they died. So they lived in several places, not the first place they came.
Parents attracted to a smaller town or like smaller farm versus like living in a larger city?
No, my father didn't really like the city life. He found out he was homesick for the farm. Literally, he wrote that in his autobiography that he left to all of us, that he became homesick for the farm. City life wasn't for him, and he didn't like the factory life either. He didn't want to be stuck with that. But he was born and raised on a farm, and he loved it, so he stuck with that.
Did your parents send any money back to their family in Holland?
No, they didn't. In fact, things started to improve pretty quickly in the early 50s. If they had stayed in Holland another several years, they probably wouldn't have left, because economically it started to improve. But when you have a war like World War II devastating the whole continent, it takes a while for the economy to recover from all of that.
Were there some economic, political factors that led your parents to move like away from Holland, to want to move to America?
Yes, it really was the fact that the economy was depressed after World War II. The opportunities weren't there, and they weren't able, as the oldest in their families, they weren't able to take over the family farm, so that opportunity wasn't there.
How did your family maintain communication with your family back in Holland? Were there challenges in maintaining connections with your family being a long distance away from Holland?
You know, it was mostly by letter. It was not by phone call. Phone calls were extremely expensive, and I don't think my grandparents had a phone when they first immigrated, so it was by letter. And when I was born, a year later, they sent a telegram to Holland to announce my birth. I was the first grandchild on both sides. It was a big deal, but they had to do it by telegram. And in 1952, when they left, they assumed they might never see their children, John and Drika, again, because immigrants weren't coming back, and it was expensive to go back and forth. You didn't, but things changed quickly, and my mother took the three of us who were little kids at that time back in 1958 to visit. That's just a few years later. Things had changed that much. Then my father visited in 63, and then little by little there were more and more visits. But in 1952, it looked like you wouldn't see your loved one again. It was, the other way they communicated was by sending packages. My grandparents would send packages to us, which we thought was great fun when we were little, because there would be sweets, Dutch sweets in there, goodies. And we would look forward to those packages very much. And then my grandmother would choose fabric for my mother to sew things for us. And they would send Dutch magazines. So my parents in the evening, when they would rest from a day's work, they would read their magazines in Dutch. So packages were another form of communication. But it took decades before they started actually phone calling back and forth.